Frederick is a small, ordinary town in Colorado, USA, much like any other. It doesn't have many attractions and is relatively unknown to most people. However, a shocking and tragic case brought this town into the spotlight, making people across America and around the world remember its name. The central figure in this story is Shanann, a woman with a loving husband and two adorable daughters. Her life appeared perfect, with a successful career and a happy family, making many admire her. In the early hours of August 13, 2018, Shanann, who was 15 weeks pregnant, returned home from a business trip. Her close friend Nicole had dropped her off and reminded her not to forget her prenatal appointment scheduled for the next morning. However, the following day, Shanann seemed to have vanished without a trace. She didn't respond to texts or calls and missed her scheduled prenatal checkup. By 12:10 p.m., Nicole, feeling increasingly worried, decided to take her son and check on Shanann. Her home, located at 2825 Saratoga Trail, was a spacious 5-bedroom house. Under the blazing sun, Nicole noticed Shanann's car parked outside, suggesting she hadn't gone far. Strangely, the doors and windows were tightly shut. Nicole knocked and called out, but there was no answer. Nicole checked the doors and windows, all intact with no signs of forced entry. Peering through the windows, she couldn't see Shanann or her daughters inside. Feeling uneasy, Nicole called Shanann's husband, Watts, to ask about the whereabouts of his wife and children. Watts worked as an operator for Anadarko Petroleum and usually left early for work. He mentioned he had no idea what was going on and that when he left for work around 5 a.m., his wife and children were still asleep. Upon hearing about his wife's disappearance, Watts immediately returned home. While waiting, Nicole contacted the police. At 1:40 p.m., an officer arrived to investigate. Watts arrived shortly after, unlocking the door and inviting the police inside. The house was empty, the doors and windows remained untouched, and there were no visible signs of a break-in. The only strange detail was the missing bedsheets. Watts speculated that his wife might have taken the children out for the day and could return soon. However, after a more thorough check, Shanann's purse, phone, and daily medications were all found in the house. This raised serious concerns. Who would leave home without their phone and wallet, especially in today's world? Furthermore, Shanann was a brand ambassador for a nutrition company, requiring constant communication with clients. Her phone was always with her 24/7, unless something unusual happened. The police began focusing more on Watts. When questioned about his last conversation with Shanann, Watts stated that she was asleep when he returned home around 2 a.m. He mentioned that they were discussing a possible separation, so he got up around 4 a.m. and they had a calm conversation. Their relationship had been strained lately, and both were feeling emotionally overwhelmed. Shanann had mentioned she planned to take the children to a friend's house but did not specify which friend. Watts left for work at around 5:30 a.m. and called Shanann during his shift, but she didn't answer. At the time, he assumed she was upset and didn't think much of it. Until now. Watts' story initially seemed plausible. A couple having marital issues, Shanann leaving upset to visit a friend and coincidentally forgetting her phone. It all sounded reasonable. The police collected surveillance footage from nearby streets and neighbors to verify when Shanann had left the house. However, none of the cameras captured Shanann or her daughters leaving the house. The only footage available showed Watts backing his truck into the garage at 5:27 a.m. and leaving the house at 5:45 a.m. Nothing else. In other words, Shanann and the children had never left the house. It was as if they had vanished without a trace. The police questioned neighbors to see if anyone had seen Shanann and the children, but everyone reported seeing nothing. As night fell, another day passed in silence without a single clue. News of the mysterious disappearance of Shanann and her daughters quickly spread across town. Rumors circulated, with some even speculating supernatural causes. The town was engulfed in fear and uncertainty. To prevent public panic, the very next day, the FBI and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation joined the case. Dozens of officers, along with highly trained K-9 units, arrived at the Watts residence for a thorough search inside and outside the house. Unfortunately, The dogs were unable to pick up any trace of Shanann or the children. Throughout the investigation, Watts cooperated fully and even agreed to a televised interview. On camera, he expressed hope that his wife and daughters would return safely. He speculated that someone may have kidnapped them and pleaded for their release. His emotional plea drew widespread sympathy. The police took the case extremely seriously. They expanded the search area, increased manpower, and posted missing persons notices everywhere, yet no progress was made. The strange disappearance, combined with growing media coverage, soon extended far beyond the small town, capturing national and even global attention. Millions followed the case, hoping Shanann and her daughters would be found safe. The pressure on law enforcement continued to mount. To crack the case faster, investigators decided to look deeper into Shanann's background. Shanann was born on January 10, 1984 in New Jersey, before her family relocated to North Carolina. She was described as stunning, with doll-like beauty and bright, warm eyes. Her parents often said she was a gift from God. Sadly, fate was unkind to this beautiful young woman. At age 25, Shanann was diagnosed with lupus, a chronic autoimmune disease with no cure. That same year, she suffered a serious car accident, further worsening her condition. Just as she was losing hope, she met Watts online. They frequently chatted and quickly became emotionally connected. One could say that Watts helped pull her out of the darkest chapter of her life. Regaining her strength, Shanann fought bravely against her illness, and her health gradually improved. On November 3, 2012, the couple tied the knot. After their wedding, they moved to Frederick, Colorado, and purchased a spacious 5-bedroom home. On December 17, 2013, their first daughter, Bella, was born. On July 17, 2015, their second daughter, Celeste, arrived. The birth of their 2 daughters strengthened Shanann's willpower and brought even more joy to their marriage. She often shared her life and family moments on social media. Although their family seemed harmonious financially, they were struggling. One could even say they were in serious debt. Their combined annual income was approximately $90,000. While this may seem substantial, it wasn't enough to cover their extensive living expenses. They had a $3,000 monthly mortgage payment, $600 in car loan payments, and were burdened with $70,000 in credit card debt, along with student loans and medical bills. In July 2014, they were sued for failing to pay HOA, Homeowners Association fees. Under mounting financial pressure, on June 5, 2015, Watts filed for bankruptcy in court. At that time, their 2 bank accounts held only $3 and $6 respectively. Despite the overwhelming financial stress, Shanann's love for Watts remained strong. In 2017, she even posted an emotional tribute online expressing her feelings for him.
Ever happened to me.
On June 11, 2018, the couple received wonderful news. They were expecting their 3rd child. Shanann was overjoyed and immediately shared the news with Watts. He also seemed delighted. After a checkup confirmed they were expecting a baby boy, they chose the name Nico for their unborn son. During the investigation, police learned that Shanann was a kind and outgoing person. Friends described her as someone full of life and deeply devoted to her family. Therefore, the possibility of her running away with the children seemed extremely unlikely. So, who took the mother and her daughters, and how did they manage to avoid being captured by surveillance cameras? Police visited Shanann's friends and family, asking whether she had displayed any unusual behavior recently. Everyone they spoke with mentioned the same thing. Shanann and Watts' marriage had been in serious trouble lately. Shanann had tearfully texted her friends, confiding that Watts didn't want a 3rd child and had even suggested they were no longer compatible and should separate soon. Shanann's mother, Sandra, also shared insights into the relationship. Initially, she described Watts as a good father and husband, with a healthy and happy marriage. However, she noted that Watts had started to change recently. On June 27th, when Shanann took her daughters to North Carolina for a summer vacation, Watts chose not to join them and only arrived 5 weeks later. One night, Shanann suffered from severe morning sickness, but Watts showed no concern for her, which Sandra found very unusual. He had previously been caring and gentle, so his sudden emotional distance seemed strange. Sandra even expressed her suspicions directly to the police, stating that she believed Watts was involved in the disappearance of her daughter and granddaughters. Coincidentally, Watts's behavior shift began after Shanann left for her summer vacation. From that point onward, their conversations became less frequent, and eventually, they stopped talking altogether. Even when they saw each other, the couple stopped hugging and kissing, becoming emotionally distant strangers. Shanann was deeply troubled by this, often confiding in friends about her fears that Watts was seeing another woman. Her fears were justified. After examining Watts's communications, the police discovered he had indeed been having an affair. The woman was identified as his co-worker, Nicole Kessinger. Watts had deceived Kessinger by claiming he was already divorced to pursue a relationship with her. The police also uncovered the activities of Watts and Kessinger during Shanann's summer trip. On July 4th, Watts invited Kessinger to his home, where they were intimate. On July 7th, they exchanged text messages late into the night. On July 14th, they went on a date at the Shelby American Collection Car Museum and stayed overnight at a nearby hotel. On July 30th, before traveling to North Carolina to reunite with Shanann, Watts wrote a love letter to Kessinger. On August 4th, Kessinger purchased a wedding dress online. On August 7th, Watts and Shanann returned home together after their summer vacation. On August 9th, Shanann left for a business trip to Arizona. On August 11th, Watts hired a babysitter, left the children with her, and went on another date with Kessinger. In reality, the affair had been going on for quite some time. Watts' phone contained thousands of pictures of Kessinger, including many explicit photos. Although he had used software to hide them, the police were able to retrieve the images. Watts expertly juggled both his wife and his mistress, managing his time with impressive precision. Furthermore, investigators discovered that he had engaged in one-night stands with other women. For example, around February 2018, he met a woman named Amanda through a dating app. When the police tracked her down for questioning, she described Watts as aggressive and rough in bed. Detectives suspected that Watts had been unfaithful multiple times. All the evidence pointed to the fact that his feelings for Shanann had completely faded. A detective with expertise in body language and psychology analyzed Watts's televised interview and noted several suspicious behaviors. Throughout the interview, Watts appeared nervous, his eyes shifting frequently, and his arms often crossed over his chest, an unmistakable defensive posture. When speaking about his wife and children, he repeatedly referred to them in the past tense as if he was certain they would never return. Additionally, Nicole, Shanann's close friend, reported two suspicious details to the police. On the day of the incident, when Nicole suggested calling the police to search for Shanann, Watts tried to discourage her, claiming he didn't want law enforcement involved. Secondly, while reviewing the surveillance footage, his behavior stood out. Typically calm and composed, Watts appeared visibly anxious when he saw footage of himself backing his truck into the garage. He crossed his arms, paced back and forth, and showed clear signs of distress, almost as if a terrible secret was on the verge of being exposed. These odd behaviors raised significant concerns for the investigators. The neighbor who provided the surveillance footage also pointed out something unusual. Watts had never backed his truck into the garage like that before. It was the first and only time he had done so, which struck the neighbor as highly suspicious. On the day of the incident, before Nicole called the police, Watts was the only person seen entering and leaving the house. If there was suspicion that he had done something harmful, it wouldn't be without reason. On August 15th, the third day after the incident, the police summoned Watts to the station for formal questioning. During the interrogation, Watts sat with his legs crossed, maintaining a calm, confident demeanor. Throughout the session, his answers were nearly flawless. He completely denied having an affair and insisted he had done nothing to harm Shanann. Without the evidence the police had already gathered, they might have believed him. An FBI profiler, after carefully reviewing the interrogation footage multiple times, noticed a key detail. Whenever Watts spoke about his wife and daughter's disappearance, he subconsciously touched his neck. Based on this body language, the agent suspected that Watts might have strangled Shanann. Despite his calm demeanor during questioning, the results of his polygraph test told a different story. He scored a shocking -18, far below the threshold for deception. When Watts was informed that he had failed the test, his composure cracked. He became visibly distressed, his face showing clear signs of internal conflict. Eventually, he broke down and confessed to the crime. Tearfully, Watts explained that on the morning of the incident, he had suggested a separation, which deeply upset Shanann. The couple argued, and when he went downstairs, he suddenly heard the sound of his children screaming. Rushing back to the bedroom, he claimed to have found Shanann strangling their daughters. Overcome with rage, he admitted to strangling Shanann until she stopped breathing. Since the garage was connected to the house, he backed his truck into the garage, wrapped Shanann's body in a bedsheet, and loaded it into the truck along with the children's bodies. He then drove to his worksite at the oil tanks to dispose of the remains. This, he said, was why Shanann and the children never appeared on any surveillance footage leaving the house. This version of events seemed highly improbable. A loving mother, pregnant with her third child, suddenly murdering her daughters? Regardless of his claims, Watts had confessed to killing Shanann. Using GPS data from his truck, investigators tracked the location of the oil site, which was approximately 60 miles from their home. Drone surveillance was deployed over the area, and officers spotted a sheet matching the missing bedsheet from Watts's home. When confronted with the aerial photos, the police demanded that Watts indicate where he had concealed the bodies. He marked 3 spots on the map, stating that his wife and 2 daughters were there. Following these leads, investigators discovered the bodies of Shanann and her daughters at the remote oil field. Shanann was found buried in a shallow grave, covered with a bedsheet. The 2 children, however, had been shoved into oil tanks with narrow openings. Autopsy results confirmed that all 3 victims had died from asphyxiation. Shanann had noticeable bruising on her neck, a broken fingernail, and a nearly 1.5-inch tear inside her mouth, indicating a violent struggle. Bella had a distinct injury on her left hip. A strand of blonde hair was found attached to one of the oil tanks, consistent with Watts forcing Bella into the container. These horrifying details revealed the extreme brutality involved in how Watts handled their bodies. Detective Tammy, upon witnessing the victim's condition, was nearly certain that Watts was the sole perpetrator. If the crime had been a momentary act of rage, he wouldn't have shown such heartless cruelty by forcing his daughters into oil tanks, an act no father could justify. Subsequently, Watts was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of tampering with evidence. On August 16, 2018, his first court appearance was held in Weld County, Colorado. The courtroom was filled with grief, and Shanann's father gave a heart-wrenching statement. The judge declared that due to the severity of the crime and the safety risk to the community, Watts would be denied bail. Despite the overwhelming evidence and emotional pleas from the victim's family, Watts continued to deny responsibility, insisting that Shanann had killed the children. At his second hearing on August 21, 2018, he pleaded not guilty to all charges. To negotiate a reduced sentence, Shanann's family chose not to pursue the death penalty. 4 lives had already been lost, and they didn't want to see anyone else die, even though Watts was a cold-blooded murderer devoid of humanity. On November 6, 2018, Watts reached a plea deal with prosecutors, admitting to killing his wife Shanann and their 2 daughters in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. Due to the severity of the crime, the presiding judge declared, "The defendant coldly and deliberately ended 4 lives. This was neither impulsive nor accidental. It was a calculated and heinous crime. I have never seen anything like this. It may be the most brutal and evil crime among the thousands of cases I've handled." Ultimately, Watts was sentenced to 5 life sentences, plus 48 years for the unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and an additional 36 years for 3 counts of tampering with evidence, totaling 84 years. Though he escaped the death penalty, there is no doubt he will never leave prison alive. After the verdict, Shanann's father confronted Watts, asking for the true motive behind the murders. However, since Watts refused to reveal the truth, the exact reasons remain unclear. Based on the evidence gathered, Investigators speculated that he wanted to break free from his family to live with his mistress. Many believed the case would fade from public attention after the trial. However, in September 2019, a book titled The Tragic Confessions of the Watts Family Murders resurfaced the case, exposing new disturbing details. The book's author, Shanann, compiled letters written by Watts from prison, collected through correspondence with him. In these letters, Watts confessed to several horrific details even the police hadn't known. His crimes were premeditated, revealing a level of cruelty beyond comprehension. The chilling truth described in his letters went as follows. On the morning of August 13th, before confronting Shanann about separating, Watts entered his daughter's room and attempted to smother them with a pillow. Miraculously, the girls survived. Later, while arguing with Shanann, he strangled her to death. When the girls woke up, they asked their father what had happened, to which Watts replied that their mother was sick. He then loaded Shanann's body and the girls into his truck and drove to the oil site. The girls sat unaware, with their mother's lifeless body lying at their feet. Tragically, they were too young to understand what had just occurred, or that they were next. Upon reaching the oil site, Watts strangled his youngest daughter, Celeste. His horrific act was witnessed by his older daughter, Bella, who cried and asked in fear, "Am I going to be like my sister?" Watts did not respond, and instead continued his ruthless killing, strangling Bella next. Her final words before dying were heartbreaking. "Please, Daddy, no." Additionally, in the letters, Watts admitted to attempting to poison Shanann in hopes she would miscarry. His ultimate goal was to eliminate his family and start a new life with his mistress, Nicole Kessinger. Reading these revelations, it's hard for anyone to suppress their outrage. The mere thought of such acts sends chills down the spine. This confession further validated the police's theory about his motive. While marital problems are becoming more common, if a relationship cannot continue, there are always options like divorce. Why resort to such extreme and unforgivable brutality? Even wild beasts protect their offspring. What Watts did reveals the darkest depths of human nature. His cold-blooded brutality is truly terrifying. One can only wonder what went through his mind as he watched his daughters lose their lives in his hands. In the dead of night, does he hear the echoes of his wife and children's voices, filled with pain and betrayal? None of that matters anymore. Cold steel bars and heavy chains in the darkness are now his only reality. His remaining years will slowly pass in isolation and regret, which might be the most fitting punishment for his crimes. What's perhaps most shocking is that even while in prison, Watts received numerous love letters. Many women sent him messages expressing their feelings, with some even including explicit photos of themselves. Some described him as one of the most kind-looking men they had ever seen, while others claimed to be deeply drawn to him. This phenomenon is difficult to understand. However, such situations are not unheard of. In multiple infamous criminal cases, many convicted felons have received romantic letters from admirers, with some even getting married while behind bars. The tragic story of the Watts family has since been adapted into multiple films and television specials, most notably the Netflix documentary American Murder: The Family Next Door, which premiered on September 30th, 2020. The documentary uses authentic footage and recordings to reconstruct the entire timeline of the crime, shedding light on the hidden cracks in the seemingly perfect family life. While the Watts case concluded with his life sentence, its haunting echoes continue to linger in the public's mind. The heartbreaking deaths of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and unborn baby Nico remain an irreplaceable tragedy, leaving behind valuable lessons and complex perspectives on the individuals involved. Watts, once seen as a loving husband and devoted father in the eyes of his community, ultimately revealed himself as a monster hiding behind a human facade. His brutal crimes were not just the result of blind passion for Nicole Kessinger, but exposed extreme selfishness, cowardice, and a complete lack of accountability. Rather than confronting his marital struggles like an adult, Watts chose murder as a way to escape, fabricating lies until the truth was undeniable. In the end, he paid the price with the rest of his life behind bars. The Watts case serves as a powerful reminder for those tempted by infidelity. Think carefully about the consequences and choose responsibility over reckless, irreversible actions. That's the end of today's video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.